The dawn broke over the North Sea like a bruise, muted purple, cold, and slow to heal. On the morning of May 10, 1945, the war in Europe was days from ending, though no one yet believed in peace. The Luftwaffe, once an eagle with talons spread over half a continent, was now a fractured shadow of itself, grounded and hunted. And yet, from a lonely airfield in Schleswig-Holstein, a single aircraft rolled down the runway, its twin engines screaming into the wind, the sound of defiance, or perhaps desperation. The plane was unlike anything most had ever seen. Sleek, angular, with engines slung under its wings like metallic lungs, it was the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. Its very existence had once been a whisper in Allied intelligence briefings, a weapon of impossible speed and terrifying potential. The Allies had bombed factories and ambushed convoys trying to stop it. But on this morning, one such jet was about to fall into enemy hands not by sabotage or combat, but by a mistake that would echo across generations. The pilot's name was Hans Fay. He was 32, the son of a mechanic from Württemberg, with the angular calm of a man who'd seen too much sky on fire. He had flown for years under the Black Cross of the Luftwaffe, serving a nation he no longer recognized. By 1945, the Reich was in its death throes. Cities pulverized, fuel gone, comrades scattered to the wind. Fay had one last order: to deliver his jet to a secret airfield near Munich, to keep it from capture. But somewhere between the thunder of the engines and the silence of his conscience, another plan formed. He would not fly south, he would fly west. At that hour, the air over northern Germany was a canvas of confusion. Refugee columns snaked across the countryside. SS patrols prowled for deserters, and the remnants of the Wehrmacht manned checkpoints that led nowhere. Fay taxied his Me 262 down the narrow strip, heart pounding beneath his flight jacket, scanning the gray horizon. He knew that to defy orders was death. To fly into Allied airspace was suicide. But to do nothing, to continue serving a cause long since rotted from within, was worse. As he pulled back on the stick, the jet leapt forward with a shriek that split the fog. The acceleration was inhuman. He felt it press his spine into the seat, the airstrip vanishing beneath him in seconds. Behind him, a few ground crewmen shouted, too late to stop him. He climbed through the mist and broke into the pale sun, the world below a map of ruin. Hamburg smoldered in the distance. Rivers gleamed like knives. Somewhere beyond that horizon, American troops were advancing north, their tanks grinding through the wreckage of Germany's last defense. The Me 262 sliced westward at nearly 500 miles per hour, faster than any propeller plane in the world could hope to chase. Below, the ground blurred into abstraction. Fay knew the risks. The Americans might shoot him down before he could land, but the thought of surrender was almost a relief. He had grown tired of fighting ghosts. The Reich's promises had turned to ashes, its victories to graves. Hours earlier, Allied radar stations along the North Sea coast had picked up a fast-moving blip, something no one could identify. The operators had seen jets before, fleetingly, but never one alone, flying straight toward their lines. The order went out: scramble interceptors. At a forward airfield in Belgium, a flight of P-47 Thunderbolts roared to life. American pilots cursed the gray weather as they lifted into the clouds, unaware that they were about to witness something from the future. High above, Fay crossed the front lines. Anti-aircraft guns below swiveled but held fire. No one wanted to waste ammunition on what might be friendly. He lowered his altitude, scanning for open fields. Then, through a break in the haze, he saw it. A long strip of grass, dotted with olive-drab vehicles and tents marked with white stars. An American base. For a moment he hesitated. To land there meant the end, not only of his freedom but of his life as he knew it. Yet his hands did not waver. He throttled back, lowered the landing gear, and descended. The Me 262's wheels touched down with a hiss, kicking up wet earth. Soldiers ran for cover, rifles raised, shouting in disbelief. A German jet landing unannounced in their midst? The guards surrounded the aircraft as its engines whined to silence. The canopy opened. A lone figure climbed out slowly, hands raised, the silver Luftwaffe eagle still stitched to his flight suit. "Don't shoot," he said in halting English. "I am surrendering. The war is over. For me." They didn't shoot, they simply stared. Within hours, word of the capture raced through Allied command. The Americans had not only taken possession of one of Hitler's most advanced aircraft, but intact, operational, with its pilot alive. It was a prize greater than any general could have hoped for. Orders came down from the highest levels: secure the jet, protect the pilot, and prepare for immediate transfer to the United States. At a hangar near Brussels, mechanics gathered like priests around a relic. They had heard stories of the German superplane, but seeing it up close was something else entirely. The fuselage gleamed under the floodlights. Its engines, Jumo 004S, were alien in design, short and thick, their interiors lined with turbine blades like teeth. The wings swept backward at an angle none of them had ever seen before, giving it the stance of a predator ready to strike. One American captain reached out to touch the metal. "My God," he whispered, "it looks like something out of the next century." Engineers from Wright Field in Ohio were already on their way. Meanwhile, Hans Fay sat in a makeshift interrogation room, chain-smoking, answering questions with the calm of a man who no longer owed allegiance to anyone. The Americans wanted to know everything: how the jet worked, where it was built, how many existed. Fay told them what he knew. The Me 262 had been plagued by political interference, sabotaged by bureaucracy as much as by bombs. Hitler had delayed its production, insisting it be used as a bomber, not a fighter. It could have ruled the skies years earlier, Fay said, if not for that single fatal decision. The irony hung in the air like smoke. For the Americans, the implications were staggering. The Me 262 was faster, higher flying, and deadlier than anything they possessed. It could outrun P-51s, tear through bomber formations, and vanish before radar could lock on. And now, by a twist of fate, they had one sitting on their runway, complete with manuals, instruments, and the pilot who flew it. Within days, the aircraft was dismantled and shipped to the United States under armed guard. Engineers at Wright Field would later reassemble it, test fly it, and learn its secrets. Secrets that would shape the birth of the jet age. But in that first stunned week of May 1945, no one yet understood the full weight of what had happened. The world's first jet fighter, born from a collapsing Reich, had fallen into the hands of its enemies by the will of one man's conscience, and Hans Fay, who had crossed the sky alone between two worlds, became a ghost in the history books, his name fading into the background of a war already too vast for memory to contain. Yet the machine he delivered, unbidden and intact, would change everything that came after. Because within a decade, every major power would fly jets descended from that design. The Me 262 had not won Hitler his war, but in falling into enemy hands, it had won the future. As night settled over the captured airfield, the Americans rolled the jet into a guarded hangar. The floodlights flickered off one by one until only its silhouette remained, black and still, like a prophecy waiting to be read. Fay, seated alone in a corner of the barracks, stared at the floor and thought of the men he'd left behind, the ones still flying, still fighting, unaware that the war had already ended for him the moment he chose to surrender, not to fear, but to reason. Outside, rain began to fall, soft, relentless, cleansing the dirt of a dying empire from the wings of a machine that no longer belonged to it. The rain did not stop for 3 days. It soaked the tarmac, the tents, the uniforms. It softened the ground around the Me 262 until the wheels sank into the mud like relics being reclaimed by the earth. For the American engineers and intelligence officers, those gray, sleepless nights in Belgium were electric with anticipation. Every rivet and wire on the captured jet seemed to whisper a new secret about the enemy's technological soul. They had fought the Luftwaffe for years, but this was something else. When the clouds broke, they rolled the jet onto a flatbed and began the long, secretive journey west. No photographers, no insignias, just guards and tarpaulins. The war in Europe was collapsing in real time. Hitler was dead, Berlin was rubble. But even in victory, the Americans knew this discovery demanded silence. The Me-262 wasn't just a weapon, it was a window into tomorrow. Hans Fay was escorted everywhere by military police. He slept in a cot inside a fenced compound, ate from tin trays, and spoke to no one except interrogators and engineers. He answered with precision, never pride. The Americans treated him cautiously. He was a pilot, but still an enemy officer. Yet as the days passed, their suspicion thawed into respect. He spoke of the aircraft's birth in 1939, the endless redesigns, the struggles to keep its engines from tearing themselves apart mid-flight. He explained how it required a delicate hand to control, how a pilot who over-throttled the Jumo 004s could burn them out in seconds. The Americans listened, took notes, and understood. This was not a fantasy weapon. It was real, flawed, and terrifyingly ahead of its time. By June, the aircraft reached Cherbourg, where Liberty ships waited in the harbor, their hulls stained with rust and oil. Soldiers watched curiously as cranes lifted the covered fuselage into the hold. The crate bore no markings, no hint of what slept inside. It was simply labeled, "Special Shipment, Wright Field, U.S. Army Air Forces." Fay followed on another vessel, under guard, but not in chains. He stood at the rail as Europe faded into mist, wondering what awaited him on the far side of the ocean. The Atlantic crossing was slow and gray. On the fourth night, Fay woke to the sound of distant engines and climbed to the deck. The sea stretched infinite and black under a canopy of stars. Somewhere above, a PBY Catalina patrol plane droned, a reminder that the war in the Pacific still burned. He thought of his former squadron, of men who'd once believed the Me-262 would save them. He knew better now. The machine had come too late. It had been born into a nation that could no longer deserve it. When the convoy reached New York Harbor, the morning fog parted to reveal the skyline, towers rising through smoke and sunlight, banners of victory already fluttering from their heights. Fay had never seen a city untouched by war. He stood motionless as the ship crept past the Statue of Liberty, its torch gleaming over a harbor filled with life instead of ruin. A military escort guided him ashore. No one knew his name, nor would they have cared to. He was just another ghost of a dying Reich, carried here by chance and metal. The Me-262 was sent by rail to Ohio under tight security. At Wright Field, a team of engineers, test pilots, and aerodynamicists gathered around the reassembled jet like surgeons before an operation. They called it Watson's Whizzers, after Colonel Harold E. Watson, who led the program to capture and study enemy aircraft. The hangars were filled with crates marked from Germany, V-2 rockets, radar arrays, jet engines, but none commanded as much awe as Fay's aircraft. When the crates were opened, the smell of oil and ozone drifted through the room. The metal gleamed even under the dim hangar lights, its swept wings and narrow nose giving it a strange, almost biological grace. The men who had flown P-51 Mustangs and Thunderbolts, their entire careers stood speechless. This was no incremental improvement. This was evolution. Test pilot Bob Strobel was the first to climb into the cockpit. He ran his hands over the German labels, the strange arrangement of gauges. "Feels like it's from another world," he murmured. The mechanics worked for weeks to prepare it for flight, replacing worn hoses, adjusting fuel mixtures, translating manuals with the help of interpreters. Fay supervised quietly, explaining each procedure, each cautionary note. He spoke not like a defeated man, but as if ensuring the machine's rebirth. Finally, in early August, the test flight was ready. The airfield was silent except for the soft hum of cameras and distant cicadas. Fay was allowed to watch from the perimeter, flanked by guards. He wore no insignia now, only a plain flight jacket. When the engine started, the roar rolled across the field like thunder chasing itself. The Me-262 lifted from the ground with a fluid, almost effortless grace, the twin exhausts trailing pale smoke. The Americans watching below felt a chill of awe. The aircraft climbed higher, faster than any they had ever seen. The test pilot's voice crackled over the radio. "Climbing at 500 knots. This thing moves like a missile." Fay closed his eyes. He could almost feel the controls in his hands again. The vibration, the trembling edge of speed that bordered on the unknown. He had lived inside that sound for years. Now it belonged to another sky. When the jet landed, the men broke into applause. The data they collected confirmed what Allied pilots had long suspected. The Me-262 could outrun and outclimb everything they had. Its swept wings gave it stability at speeds previously thought impossible. Its engines, though fragile, heralded the dawn of jet propulsion as the future of flight. Within weeks, design teams at Lockheed and North American Aviation were sketching prototypes inspired by its contours. In a quiet office nearby, Colonel Watson wrote in his report, "The German jet has redefined our understanding of air combat. Its potential exceeds any current Allied design. This machine may well dictate the nature of aerial warfare for decades to come." Fay read that line when they showed him the report. He said nothing, only nodded. For him, the Me-262 had already dictated enough lives. But the Americans saw only possibility, speed without limit, altitude without mercy. By the time Japan surrendered that September, the captured jet had been tested dozens of times. Each flight yielded new data, new questions, and with each one, the Americans grew more certain that the world had crossed an invisible line. No longer would wars be fought between men chasing one another through clouds in propeller planes. The next war, if it came, would be decided by those who commanded the sky at jet speed. Late that year, Fay was quietly debriefed for the final time. He was offered the chance to stay in America under a new name, to work as a consultant for the emerging Air Technical Intelligence Command. He declined. "I am a pilot," he said simply, "but I am done flying." He was released into obscurity. No parades, no honors, just a train ticket and the sound of the wind over empty hangars. Some said he returned to Germany, others that he vanished into South America. The records end there. But the aircraft he delivered lived on. Engineers traced its lineage directly into the designs that would soon rule the skies: the F-80 Shooting Star, the British Meteor, the Soviet MiG-15. The shape of warfare itself bent around the Me-262's shadow. In the winter of 1946, one final test flight took place over the cold Ohio plain. The jet screamed across the sky, its engines leaving twin trails that caught the sunlight like silver threads. Below, the same mechanics who had uncrated it months before looked up, shielding their eyes. They didn't cheer this time. They simply watched, knowing they were witnessing the end of one era and the fragile birth of another. For Hans Fay, wherever he was, the sound of that engine would never fade. It would echo in memory, the scream of metal and conscience of one man's decision to trade allegiance for truth. Because in the end, his act had not been a surrender. It had been a delivery of knowledge, of consequence, of the future itself. The years that followed felt strangely quiet. The war had ended, yet its echoes lingered in every engine's roar, in every contrail slashed across the morning sky. In laboratories and hangars from Dayton to Farnborough, from Moscow to Los Angeles, men who had never met Hans Fay studied his gift. The jet that had fallen from the dying Reich into their hands like a fragment of forbidden knowledge. By 1947, the Me-262 no longer existed as a single machine. It had multiplied, transformed, reincarnated in drawings and prototypes, in the minds of young engineers who spoke not of bombers or dogfights, but of altitude, thrust, and supersonic flight. They had seen what war could birth when desperation married genius. Now they would build its children. At Wright Field, Colonel Watson's office walls were lined with sketches of new aircraft, American silhouettes that borrowed the Me-262's angles, its stance, its daring. The Lockheed P-80 had already taken to the air, its lines unmistakably inspired by Fay's machine. Jet propulsion, once a rumor on the battlefield, had become a language of its own. Yet beneath the triumph lay a darker realization. The future Fay had delivered was not just faster. It was colder. The age of the jet was also the age of distance, of machines outrunning the men who built them. Dogfights would become rare. Pilots would vanish at the edge of the sky, guided not by instinct but by instruments and radar. Warfare was evolving beyond touch, beyond sight. For the Americans, that transformation came with pride. For Fay, wherever he was, it might have come with silence. He had disappeared after his release, a man without a country. Intelligence files suggested he returned briefly to Stuttgart under an assumed name. Neighbors recalled a quiet man who fixed farm machinery and never spoke of the war. They said he would pause when planes passed overhead, watching them fade into the blue until only the sound remained. In 1948, a photograph surfaced, a grainy image taken at an air show in Munich. Among the crowd stood a man who looked like Fay, lean, aging, his eyes lifted toward the sky as a British meteor screamed past. No one could confirm it. A year later, the trail vanished for good. But the machine he once piloted had not vanished. It had become myth. In classrooms and museums, the Me 262 was displayed behind glass, stripped of fear, reduced to metal and memory. Children pointed at its swept wings, unaware that it had been born in a world where science and morality had already begun to diverge. The irony was sharp. The jet Hitler had hoped would reverse Germany's defeat instead became the foundation of his enemy's triumph. From its captured engines came the designs that powered the Cold War, the F-86 Sabre, the MiG-15, the Comet airliner. The skies above Korea would blaze with their descendants, both sides flying ghosts of the same ancestor. And through all of it, a quiet truth endured. One man's defection had altered the trajectory of nations, not through ideology, but through action. Historians would later call Fay's flight an accident of war, a fluke of circumstance. But that simplification stripped it of what made it human. The decision to turn west that morning in May 1945 had not been an error in navigation. It had been an act of conscience. Fay had not given his aircraft to America. He had given it to the world that might still deserve it. Decades later, as the jet age matured into the space age, the echoes of that choice persisted. When NASA's test pilots at Edwards Air Force Base broke the sound barrier, they did so using lessons that began with the Me 262's first trembling flights. Its engines, though primitive, had introduced the concept of thrust-to-weight ratios that guided rocket design. Its aerodynamic sweep had shown how to slice through air at near transonic speeds. Even in the shadows of Apollo rockets, traces of its lineage endured. In 1963, at a museum in Washington, D.C., one of the few surviving Me 262s was restored to its former state. The restorers worked in reverent silence, sanding away rust, repainting the faded cross, and preserving the cockpit instruments exactly as they had been found. On the day it was unveiled, veterans gathered beneath its wings, men who had fought against it in the skies over Europe. Some saluted it out of habit, others simply stared, unable to reconcile its beauty with what it had once been built to do. A colonel, gray-haired and stooped, was overheard whispering, "That plane killed friends of mine, but damn if it isn't magnificent." The crowd dispersed, but the aircraft remained, a fossil from a future that had arrived too soon. The placard beside it read only, "Messerschmitt Me 262A1A, captured May 1945. No mention of the pilot, no note of the quiet rebellion that had brought it here. History had claimed the machine and left the man behind. Yet, in a sense, that was fitting. The war had been filled with generals and leaders, but progress, true progress, often belonged to those who defied them. Fay had understood something his superiors never could, that technology without morality is a weapon without purpose. Sometimes, late at night, the museum guards would say they heard faint metallic echoes from the hangar, like the distant hum of turbines spooling up after decades of silence. They said it sounded almost alive. But perhaps it was only the wind against the corrugated roof, or perhaps, as one old mechanic once said, it's just history remembering itself. Outside those museum walls, the world continued to chase the sky. Jets became faster, sleeker, armed with missiles and guidance systems that no pilot from 1945 could have imagined. Nations built fleets that could cross oceans in hours, bomb cities without warning, vanish into the stratosphere. The Me-262's descendants ruled those heavens. And yet, for all their power, none carried the same paradoxical weight, the same fusion of brilliance and tragedy, as that first one that had landed, trembling and steaming, on a muddy Allied airfield in May 1945. In that single act, one man had turned a weapon of tyranny into a catalyst for progress. He had taken something born in darkness and delivered it, unwillingly perhaps, into the hands of those who might wield it more wisely. History rarely remembers such gestures. It remembers battles, not mercy, inventions, not intentions. But somewhere above the fog of those final days, a jet once carved the sky and changed the course of the future, not through victory, but through surrender. And if you listen closely, through the static of old recordings, through the distant echo of turbine blades long since stilled, you might still hear the sound of that engine rising, fading, rising again. A reminder that even in war, courage sometimes flies the other way.